Just a Concerned Citizen by Damos on AO3. Chapter 20. Convinced. Sometimes Izuku really wished he could stop thinking so hard about things. In theory, that trait of his was a good thing, or so his therapist kept reminding him. She said, "Not many people have critical thinking skills as strong as you do." It's what had got him noticed by Hitoshi, and what had carried him through the very many dangerous situations he had been in, not only recently, but throughout his entire life. It was what was currently allowing him to help people in a way he had long ago given up being able to do. Hell, it's what had given him his job. What it didn't do was help him figure out just what Hitoshi Shinsou thought of him. Izuku had accepted that they were friends, because at this point, if they weren't, he didn't know what to make of anything. If there was anything more, well, Izuku hadn't had very many real-life friends before now, but he was confident that there was something different between him and Hitoshi and, say, Uraraka or Ida or anyone else. Saying out loud that he and two high-ranking pros were friends was still a little unbelievable, but he was getting there. It could have been because of the long life or death situation they spent together. Or maybe it was just because they were roommates? Or maybe Izuku was just projecting what he wanted to be true onto things that should have been innocuous. He was pretty sure he wasn't, though, and that was what made figuring out what to do so difficult. The fact that he sometimes spent nights half-heartedly smothering himself under a pillow because he just remembered that Hitoshi was the next room over, and wouldn't it be nice if his big, strong arms were wrapped around him, made Izuku much less sure if he was reading the moment when Hitoshi actually did do something like that totally wrong. Which, yeah, Izuku had never pegged Hitoshi as a particularly physical person, and honestly it seemed like he mostly wasn't. But every now and then, he'd end up with an arm around his shoulder, or long legs tossed over his own, or a hand on top of his head. Once, after a particularly heavy day at therapy, Hitoshi had just held him, somehow aware that it was the thing he needed most. And yes, those all could be perfectly normal friendship things. If only he'd ever seen Hitoshi do something like that with anyone else. Hitoshi was friends with Tokoyami and Kaminari and Shoto, and the most physical interaction he'd had with any of them, at least where Izuku could see, was bumping shoulders. And that was to say nothing of the looks. He was beginning to lose count of the amount of times he caught Hitoshi just watching him, usually with a slight smile, and when Izuku brought it up to Hitoshi, he would just brush it off and say he had gotten lost in thought, which was fine, but it always seemed to happen when Hitoshi was looking at him. All of the evidence Izuku was gathering pointed to a certain conclusion that made him both incredibly hopeful and incredibly nervous. He could complain that Hitoshi hadn't said anything, but then again, he hadn't either. So, what to do about it? One of the things he learned from his new job was that when he didn't know enough about something, he didn't always have to stay up hours hunting for tiny details to find new leads. Sometimes he had the option of asking for clarification, or even for a hero to go out and find more information. One day, he might be able to do it himself, but for now, it was a resource he was trying to get comfortable using. When applying that knowledge to his private life, though, well, asking for relationship advice was a thing friends did, right? He should be in the clear to do that. That was how he ended up in a booth of a tiny ramen restaurant with an incognito Uraraka and Shoto. Alright, he lied. He really hadn't started to get used to that. He wasn't sure if he ever would. Muscle sore from a long day of physical training. He had been able to get away and not end up dead when both of the heroes he'd been practicing with had come after him at the same time. If he hadn't been distracted, he might have gotten the chance to hide away and get the jump on Shoto, which would have been a feat on its own. Though he still hasn't quite managed it. He was doing okay, or at least he thought so, and Uraraka at least thought so too, because she ordered and turned to face with a bubbly smile. "I meant to say, you've been making great progress. If you keep up this pace, I bet you'll totally be ready for the provisional license in a few months. Izuku flushed a little at the compliment. He'd done his research and knew that the licensing exam for adults tended to be more rigorous than those for high schoolers. Depending on the format, he could run into some real problems, and there was no way he'd be prepared for as long as most of the other people who would have been there. But before he could voice any of those doubts, Shoto piped up with, I think the window for submitting applications opens soon. You'll probably want to start figuring out which agency you want to sponsor you. Shoto's tone of voice very much implied that he thought that Izuku would ask him. Honestly, Shoto's steadfast support of him from the beginning had meant a lot to Izuku, but he hadn't been able to understand why Shota had put so much faith in him until he found out that the case he had sent their way, for the first time, caused his agency's case resolution rate to edge above Endeavor's. I'll start thinking about it, yeah, he said, knowing full well that Tokoyami would already be taking that honor. Heroes tended to get sponsored by the type of agencies they were looking to join later, after all. Uraraka elbowed him in the side. Does that mean you've been thinking about a hero name? I might have. Izuku forced his mouth into a thin line so he wasn't smiling so obviously. He honestly wasn't sure if anyone but him would really understand it. But the idea of him having a hero name still felt like a dream. It's a secret, though. You can't pry it out of me. Uraraka huffed, but was immediately distracted by the delivery of their drinks to the table. The waiter clearly recognized at least Shoto and didn't seem to care, and when Izuku commented on it, the man shrugged and said, That's why I like this place. Izuku stirred the ice in his drink, trying to figure out how to word what he wanted to say. He didn't ask himself what the worst that could happen was, because he knew that he liked to categorize a little bit too much. Yes, the anxious part of his brain was telling him that actually admitting his crush out loud would cause his friends to laugh at him and abandon him. But the logical, slightly vindictive part said that if they did that, then the joke was on them, because the effort wouldn't have been worth the payoff. He cleared his throat and watched the ice swirl around. I have a question for you guys. About Hitoshi? As if he said the magic words, both heroes' eyes locked on him with surprise intensity. Izuku almost bailed. Do you know if he, Izuku bit his lip. Do you know what he's like when he likes someone? Uraraka leaned closer to him, eyes sparkling with something devious. Oh, do you think he likes someone? He looked over at Sho, whose mouth was quirked into a smile that on anyone else probably would have been hysterical laughter. He took a deep breath. I think so, but I like him, so I want to make sure I'm not misreading things. He had gone into this hoping for helpful advice, or at least some sympathy. He didn't know what to make of the fact that both of his friends sighed and said at the same time, Oh, thank God. At his confused blink, Uraraka put her chin in her hands. We were really afraid that you were both just being really dense. Izuku willed his face to not heat up any more than it already had. So, we're on the same page? You think he might like me? Uraraka snorted. I don't think might is even a question. He totally does. Probably more than he liked anyone else, ever. Shota added. He's usually much better at hiding his emotions than he has been with you. He knew that already in theory, but the confirmation had him totally failing to keep his face from turning bright red. Well, that's good. He swallowed. Is there a reason he hasn't said anything, or why I shouldn't? He knew the answer to the second question. Well, at least partially the fact that he'd risk dying of embarrassment on the spot. His friends probably didn't think that was a very good answer, though. They did look thoughtful. At some point, their food arrived, though Izuku couldn't make himself pay it any mind. Finally, Uraraka said, As much as I like to mock him for being a coward, I think he's just trying to be respectful of your feelings. You've been through a lot of major life-changing events in a short amount of time. You're sort of still going through one right now. Also, he is a coward, Shota added. Izuku slowly reached for the chopsticks, breaking them apart, as pensive frown formed on his face. So, you think he might be waiting for me to get my hero license. God, he hoped not. Thinking about that already filled him with anxious dread. He didn't want something else to be writing on it, too. Uraraka broke her own chopsticks and stirred her noodles for a moment. I don't think it's that serious, but sort of. She looked over at Shoto, who wasted no time digging into his own dish. He swallowed a mouthful of noodles and added, "You didn't hear this from me, but he's always been worried about being seen as manipulative because of his quirk. I'd imagine he's waiting until he feels like you feel comfortable rejecting him if you wanted to." Izuku felt like he shouldn't have been as blindsided about this as he was. Hitoshi had all but told him he'd still face discrimination for his quirk. He acted so confident most of the time, but he was a human with his own insecurities. Still, but I wouldn't want to. Uraraka sighed. And that's exactly why the two of you have come to an impasse. You know what this means you have to do, right? Um, said Izuku. No? It means, she said, very seriously, though not without a devilish smile, that you have to tell him. Hitoshi slid through the door of his apartment around 3 a.m. It had been a long, uneventful night of patrolling that was made immediately better when he got home to find the lights still on. He still wasn't used to coming back to an apartment that wasn't empty, but he kind of really liked it. Hitoshi took a moment to pull off his boots, stopped off to give Shithead a few well-deserved pets, and made his way into the kitchen, where Izuku was sitting on the counter, hunched over something with a pen. It didn't look like a notebook, and Hitoshi's lip twitched into a grin once he caught a glimpse of what it was. Paperwork? Yeah. Izuku looked up at him with a smile that was a little apprehensive. I was wondering if you would look it over with me? Hitoshi nodded and sat next to him, pausing for a moment once he saw what the paperwork was actually for. The application for the provisional license exam. Really, there wasn't much to it at all, and nothing that Izuku was really at risk of filling in wrong. He had to glance over the sheet once before his eyes flickered back to the top of the page, where the line for hero name had been filled in. Try as he might, he couldn't keep his brows from pulling together. Yaku, as in useless? Oh, yeah, kind of? Izuku bounced on one leg anxiously, but he was still smiling, even in the face of Hitoshi's deepening frown. It's another way to read my name. It's, well, it's something I got called as a kid, a lot. I thought, people are going to say that kind of stuff about me anyway, so I might as well be cheeky about it. Cheeky. Hitoshi's eyes were dragged back to the carefully written Deku. You're not, though. Useless. I know, Izuku replied, easier than Hitoshi had expected. If I can prove it to myself, then I can prove it to everyone else too. Hitoshi wasn't sure if he should be proud of the confidence, or if he should protest the name a little more. Then again, he'd arrived at Mind Jack from long years of being called various of Mind Freak and Mind Fucker, so he could understand the sentiment. He shuffled the papers back over and offered what he hoped was an encouraging smile. You will. Izuku smiled back, bright and genuine, and Hitoshi thought he was doing that thing again where he wanted to just keep staring forever. Some part of his mind wandered off to wax poetry about how he was too good for this world, how he was amazing for still being able to smile like that. The only thing that kept him from embarrassing himself this time was the drumming of the pen on the counter as Izuku looked back at the papers, reminding him that Izuku was right there and could see him. Nervous, he offered. Izuku let out a shaky chuckle. Yes. Well, no? Yes. Izuku wriggled his nose. Yes to what you're thinking about, and yes to something else, too. Okay. The rambling made that obvious, at least. At some point, the tea kettle had started to whistle. Hitoshi hadn't even realized it had been on. Would talking about it help? No, it'll just make it worse. But I have to, or else I'm not going to be able to stop thinking about it. Izuku stood up and made his way around the counter, starting the process of steeping the tea. You're working the late patrol again tomorrow, right? Are you gonna stay up? Yeah. If it hadn't been before, he was going to now. I'll be here, if you need. Izuku nodded, and in a few minutes, Hitoshi was sitting next to him on the couch, mug of tea in hand, watching Izuku fidget and try to figure out how to say whatever he was going to say. Hitoshi did his best not to speculate too wildly. This could be about anything. His licensing exam, his work, his friends, maybe something about his past? Shit. If Bakugo had somehow found him. So, I went out for food after training today with Shoto and Uraraka. Friend stuff then. And we had a conversation that, well, Izuku grimaced, then sighed, looking up at Itoshi with an expression that was equal parts apprehensive and searching. Hypothetically, what would you do if a civilian had feelings for you? Wait. Wait. Holy shit. Was he even ready to have this conversation? Were they even having the same conversation? Uh, he croaked, trying to get his suddenly blank mind to come up with something. Hypothetically. Me? Or hypothetically pro hero? Izuku licked his lips, and Hitoshi did not look down at the movement. Hypothetically you. Okay, so they were having the same conversation. His heart was suddenly beating so wildly in his chest that he felt like it might explode. Hitoshi had all the time in the world to work out how this conversation was going to go, and he hadn't done it yet, huh? He really didn't want to mess this up, but he had to be honest too. Well, that's complicated, I guess. He set his mug on the coffee table just to be safe. If they were someone I was interested in having a relationship with, I'd want to make sure they understood what they were getting into, with my job being what it is. That wasn't actually a concern. Izuku understood what he did better than most spotlight heroes. I'd also want to make sure that they didn't just feel that way because of my job, or because I've helped them, or something like that. It was a little cruel to say it out loud, but it was important. And somewhere along the way, Hitoshi had gotten dangerously far away from the land of hypotheticals. Izuku made a sound that seemed offended, and Hitoshi almost started to take it back. But just as he opened his mouth, the shorter man responded with an expression so fiercely it almost looked comical on him. But that's just ridiculous. I mean, you being a hero is really cool, don't get me wrong, but you're also someone who cares. Like, actually cares, and Izuku cut himself off with a sucked in breath. Oh god. Not offended him. Offended for him. Izuku's mouth clamped shut, face turning a rather brilliant shade of red. Was this the perfect time for Hitoshi to finally say something? Yes, obviously. Still, he threw Izuku a way out. Hypothetically. And if it had been the Izuku he found scraping by in a tiny apartment, or even the Izuku of a month ago, he probably would have nodded and agreed. The Izuku of tonight bit his lip and then squared his shoulders to face Hitoshi, eyes bright with determination. No, not hypothetically. Izuku maintained eye contact, even as he nervously turned the mug in his hand. I got the advice that it's best to be real clear with what I want, so he took a deep breath. Eyes flickered down to his hands for a moment before looking back up to meet Hitoshi's. Now he really couldn't look away. I like you. A lot. Romantically. He took a shaky breath. I like to be your date, and to be your boyfriend. And then more wavering. And kiss you, if you'll be alright with that. Well, holy shit. Hitoshi gaped for a moment, his whole body feeling light and fuzzy. He was probably the one who was red in the face now. Didn't matter. Nut up or shut up. Right? Yes, he said, his own voice surprisingly rough with emotion. To all of that. And hell, if Izuku had been brave enough to say all of that out loud, didn't he deserve to hear it back? I like you too, romantically. I'd like to be your boyfriend and go on dates with you, and hell, if you're alright with it, I'd like to do the last thing right now. Please, breathed Izuku, fast enough to be a dangerous ego boost. Leaning forward enough that Hitoshi decided he might as well just finally go for it. He reached out to cup Izuku's face, both of their eyes fluttering shut, as Hitoshi leaned forward himself and pressed a gentle kiss to Izuku's lips. His lips were soft and tasted like tea, but more important than that was the fact that Izuku was smiling. It made him want to linger more than he already was. And well, if Izuku's hand, still warm from cradling his mug, found its way behind his neck and pulled him closer, he was certainly going to oblige. There was more to talk about, and so much more to do. But now, at least, they could enjoy the fact that, sometimes, things changed for the better. So, it kind of snuck up on me, the ending of this one. It snuck up on me. I already have one that's going to be replacing this one. It is a Gen fic, it is not a Shindeku fic. I did not find a Shindeku fic in time. But, as I said, I would love to hear your recommendations in the bottom, right? I do have some Shindeku fics that I've asked to Podfic. I'm just waiting for replies. So it's not that I haven't found Shindeku fics, it's that I haven't gotten responded. Therefore, I haven't gotten the A-OK to do them. Because, for permission. Because I'm a decent human being. But yeah, the one that's going to be replacing this is called An Unexpected Future. It is a crossover fic between My Hero Academia and The Umbrella Academy. It's a very interesting premise, and I'll tell you all about it in the next chapter of Just a Concerned Citizen. It's going to be taking the slot of this one, and it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be very fun. It's also, it's going to be, there's going to be Dadzawa in that one, so look forward for that. But I'm definitely trying to find more Shindeku, and you know, I'm writing a Shindeku fanfic, so I'll keep you guys posted on when that gets updated and stuff, because I haven't even posted chapter 1. I've written the base, the what's it called, the draft, but yeah, no, my drafts look like bullet points, if I'm being honest. Bullet points without the bullet points, if that makes sense. But yeah, and if you're in the Discord, those in the Discord get to beta read the chapters way before. So those in the Discord actually get access to it probably a week in advance before it actually is going to get uploaded onto AO3. And you get to put in your income input. So if you want to be a beta reader, go ahead and join my Discord, which is in the description. Which, talking about that now, I am now going to go back into my outro. So, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.